and welcome to IISS. My name's Nigel Inkster. I'm the Director for Transnational Threats and Political Risk here at the Institute, and it's my great pleasure to be hosting this session this morning. I think it's fair to say that Colombia, over the recent few decades, has been no stranger to a complicated security situation in which criminality, insurgency, and terrorism have come together, in a very complex combination with first organized narcotics criminal groups and then an insurgency which became involved in the narcotics industry, and various forms of criminality that have spun out of that. But from a situation 15 years ago when I think there was concern that Colombia might be in serious difficulty, things have turned around, and Colombia's security situation is much improved. The insurgency is much reduced. Peace talks are now underway and making some serious progress. And it begins to look as if Colombia is now poised to realize its full potential as a power uniquely placed as both an Atlantic and a Pacific nation, and a country with enormous economic potential already, despite the residual violence, posting impressive levels of economic growth and with the prospect of more to come. But there is still a very complex security environment within Colombia, and I'm delighted to welcome our speaker, Dr. Juan Carlos Pinzón, the Minister of Defense for Colombia, who's no stranger to this institute, having, I think, been a member for many years and having visited us in the past. I'd now like to turn the floor over to Dr. Pinzón to give us his take on what is happening in Colombia from the defense and security perspective, and then we'll have time for questions and discussions. So without further ado, Dr. Pinzón, welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Niall. Well, good morning to all, and thank you, Nigel, for your kind presentation and your efforts on supporting Colombia too. Part of your work, at least a very well published work, was in essence a study on intelligence, on FARC intelligence, that gave a lot of light on what was going on in Latin America with that terrorist organization by the end of last century and the early part of this one. It's a great honor to be here at IISS. This is one of the most, if not the most, prestigious academic institution in the world on strategic studies. At least has been extremely resilient after Cold War and after many changes in world security environment. This institution has always been a leader on discussions. And as you said, I feel very proud I was maybe the first Colombian member as a junior member many, many years ago, almost 15, 20 years ago, when we start in this career of having an interest for strategic studies and for the challenges that we had in Colombia. What we had was really serious, really dramatic. We were considered by many as a failed state. We were having really problems that were not deniable anymore. Drug trafficking was running not only, had infiltrated not only politics, the economy, and day-to-day life, but suddenly became the main source of funding, not only anymore for drug cartels, but at the same time for insurgencies or terrorist structures that became even stronger after the end of Cold War. In many countries, the end of Cold War implied the end of violence, and in many countries, the end of Cold War implied peace. That's what happened in Central America, that's what happened in certain African countries and even in Asia. In Colombia, what it meant was the strengthening of the terrorist organizations. They were funded by drugs, and they began to really be in a network, not only in the region, but with connections in several parts of the world. The numbers were critical, and the situation was very difficult. I can just tell you that after years of efforts, and after a permanent sacrifice of our armed forces, of some of our best soldiers, policemen that have been killed in action or that have been wounded, the country has changed, and has changed for good. Just let me give you some numbers for you to remember. We had some like 30,000 homicides by 1998. By the end of last year, we had half that number. Kidnappings, we had something like 3,500 kidnappings per year by the year 2000. Last year we had less than 200. And this year we have the lowest number in a little bit more than a decade on that statistic. Terrorist acts were something like 1,500 a year. Last year we have less than half of those. But let me give you a picture. At that time, a terrorist act was in essence a car bomb in the middle of a major city, an attempt to take a military base or police station in a town, the destruction of the mayor office and the bank and the central area of a town for a long time as well, and in certain places of the country, in many places of the country at the same time, more than 300 per year. Now the kind of terrorist actions that we see are different in magnitude. You see grenades being thrown into a small town. You see an effort on the pipeline, but you don't see anymore this magnitude of terrorism. Also, the kind of result that this has implied in terms of economic life and social life. Unemployment was 20% by the end of 1999. Last year we had, for the first time in almost 2 decades, a one-digit unemployment number. The economy is growing at a pace above 4.5% per year, and it has become a sustained situation despite economic crisis in Europe, Asian deceleration on economic activity. Colombia continues to grow. Investment. Private investment, when I was with President Santos at the Ministry of Finance, I remember very much one of our major concerns. By 1999, the investment rate as percentage of GDP was around 12%. And it was dramatic. We were thinking, okay, how can we change this country if this is the investment rate we have? How can we create enough wealth in order to share and to make this country different? Well, by the end of last year, investment is around 29% of GDP. FDI has become a critical driver, moving from $2,400 million by 2000 to $16 billion last year. And that's quite dramatic and quite a change. Why has all this happened? I think this is, as I said before, the result of decision, the result to confront terrorism, the result to defeat the sources of funding of that terrorism, of going after drug trafficking, of going after the criminal structures, either from the FARC, the ELN, the criminal bands, or cartels, or any other kind of a structure. We are going, and we have been going after all of them. The consequence is a dramatic change in Colombia. And I think that will be the best signal we can give. Sounds easy, and it sounds, I'm just summarizing a whole set of policies, a whole set of actions, a whole set of historical victories from the armed forces, but in essence, that's what it has implied, a change because we have decided to confront those problems. When I am asked in any international meeting on what would you recommend for X country or Y country when you have these kind of problems, my recommendation has always been you have to confront your problems. And you have to keep doing whatever is necessary, whatever the cost. Because that's the other thing. This has not been it hasn't been free, to put it in a way. It has implied a lot of cost in human lives, in resources, in sacrifice, but at the same time, the results are there for the Colombian people. This environment in which President Santos, by the way, was a major contributor as being a former Minister of Defense, at a time in which we were really having progress in security, but let's face it, at that time, not even in our military services, anyone was thinking that was possible to really go after the top leadership of the FARC or even of the criminal bands. So during his time as minister, we were able to put, I was his deputy, we were able to put all the energy, resources, and by the way, align the will of our services, their intelligence, their knowledge, and all our capabilities with international support, strong US support, and strong UK support, and strong all partners' efforts. Merging all this, at that time we were able to really begin to go after that leadership and to prove them that they were at risk and that they could be defeated. And that's what we slowly, step by step, one by one, were able to put together. As I am in this room, you will see some Colombian uniforms from our military. Some are in civilian clothing, our police or member of the armed forces that are not in uniform. But I can tell you, among you in this room, we have heroes. Heroes of flesh and bones, as they said. They are here among us. And those efforts allow us to really take down several of the top leaders of the FARC that were untouchable for 40 years. With this conviction, capability, and victories, when President Santos came to government, now as President of Colombia, elected with the highest ever voting in the pollings in Colombia, he came with a clear message. He wanted to bring peace and prosperity for Colombia. And in order to do that, we have a whole set of policies and a whole strategy to get there. What is this strategy about? First, we're working hard, really hard, on reducing poverty, and reducing inequality. That is the first layer of our effort. We understand that certainly there are drug traffickers, there are terrorists, there are several kinds of crime structures, but there are reasons, or at least there are excuses, depends on how you want to see it, who is talking. Anyway, we need to do more for our people. We need to reduce that inequality, we need to reduce poverty. And in consequence, there are important policies on that front. We have created specialized agencies in the government to confront each of the different kinds of social problems, even from child's below 5-year-old, policies for the elder, housing policies for the poorest in the society, and so on. There are several types of policy. The results are there. After several years of efforts and the efforts of this government, we have seen a reduction on extreme poverty, according to World Bank data, a reduction on poverty as a whole, and this year was released for the first time a number in which Gini coefficient is showing that inequality is finally sitting in Colombia. So I think that's the first layer. Second layer, reconciliation and peace efforts. In the middle of a conflict, the government decided to present to Congress a law on land reform, land restitution, and victims' compensation. That is quite progressive, quite difficult, by the way, operationally speaking, but it's happening. We are moving forward onto those policies. And we're doing this because we are trying to close the gaps between Colombian society and the wounds that are in our society and the scars that are part of our history, our recent history. Then we have a policy to a third layer to promote sustainable economic progress and development. We need to fund our social effort. We need to fund our security effort. We need a sound and sustainable economy. In consequence, Colombian economy is being soundly managed. We have been getting upgrades when everybody's getting downgrades in credit ratings, Colombia has been getting upgrades in the past 3 years. And I think that's substantial. It shows that it's our intent to have sound fiscal, sound external economic policies. And I think it is giving credibility, and with the changes in security, no doubt, but having a sound environment, it has made attractive the country, and it has made it more sustainable. As part of this effort, we have been committed to enhance our international involvement in world economy, in trade. In the past 3 years, we have signed a free trade agreement with the United States, a free trade agreement with the European Union, a free trade agreement with South Korea, and with other regional partners in the hemisphere. Always looking to find more and better opportunities for trade and for our efforts. A fourth effort in which we have been involved for layer is diplomacy. As part of this peace and prosperity strategy, we have been more involved with the international community. We have been more active. We have been trying to take best practices on every field, from economic and social policies, making an effort to get into OECD standards, to more recently, this week, by the way, we were able to sign a cooperation agreement with NATO and start to work a cooperation effort with European Union on the security field. What I'm trying to tell is we are trying to be more active, we're trying to bring more best practices, and we're trying to connect even more because that continues to help to put ourselves outside isolation, if it happened at a point, and by the way, deny the terrorist organizations or other criminal structures to really influence our society. And finally, the fifth layer is security. And I leave it for last because it's my field, it's our effort, but by the way, because it's the base for every other policy in Colombia, and is what guarantees that the whole strategy of President Santos of peace and prosperity can be reachable. What are we doing in security? First, we have been strengthening the armed forces. We have increased the size of national police. As we speak, we are increasing the next year police in 15,000 more men and women, because we need to prepare for different challenges. We need to guarantee that progress in security will be maintained. Public order should be part of our day-to-day life. And in another feature, because more and more Colombians still are concerned about terrorism, about crime, organized crime, but more and more they are concerned about day-to-day street crime and security issues. This is a sign of progress because it shows that we're getting towards we want, that we're getting towards the problems that most of the countries, that most of the citizens anywhere, everywhere will have. I think that's an important signal too. We keep strengthening our armed forces. We are increasing the number of helicopters, the number of transportation aircraft, the number of riverine vessels, hovercraft. We're getting hovercraft from Britain, by the way. That's a novelty for Colombia, and I think it's going to be very useful, frankly speaking, to patrol and to protect some of our rivers and border areas. We are investing in intelligence technologies. We are investing in several technologies that continue to enhance the qualities and the capabilities of the armed forces. We are at the same time investing in military engineers in order to respond to different ways of necessary military operations in those isolated areas, providing construction response to Colombian people. So in general terms, we keep strengthening our armed forces. Second, we are investing in the welfare of our armed forces. I think that's important. I think that if you have a group, a set of members of the armed forces that we respect, that the country appreciates, the minimum you can do is to continue to guarantee the basic benefits, not in terms of extra benefits, but in terms of guaranteeing that they can comply with their duties. As you can imagine, when we had to grow the way we did in the past decade, many of those necessary benefits, like the health care, like the basic infrastructure, in essence got in a backlog, to put in a way. So we are trying to invest and to recover part of that backlog. Thirdly, we are working on legal and judicial reforms. This has been quite discussed. By the way, it has created international and national debate. And I have to tell, there's maybe no other country in the world that when makes a reform on its institutions is ready to make such a global debate and to open discussion for anyone who wants to come and give an opinion. NGOs, political parties, governments, etc. We had to discuss those reforms in Congress, article by article, in order to reach what we call qualified majority, which is above a simple majority, you know. And that's how those reforms were approved. What those reforms were looking for? We were looking for harmonizing international humanitarian law into the Colombian law. That was the first objective. The second objective, to define a clear borderline between what can come to military justice and what cannot. So issues related to operations under the framework of international humanitarian law will come and can come to the military justice. But any activity from a military, from a police that is out of their operational duties will never come to military justice, will always be part of the civilian ordinary justice. And by the way, several types of conducts, of behaviors, if they happen, will never come to military justice. Let me give you some examples. Crimes against humanity, genocide, extrajudicial killings, or sexual violence will never come under military jurisdiction. I think that's progressive. That's, I think, moving ahead of times. But at the same time, is giving clear framework to our armed forces. And is giving them the guarantee that they can act in a legitimate way, producing the results that the Colombian people expect. On that front of legitimacy, we continue to enhance programs on the protection of human rights. We continue to promote programs to enhance the knowledge, capability, and training under international humanitarian law. This is always challenging, but I can tell you, I challenge any other armed forces in the world to see who gets the most education on these fields. And I think you will see that our Colombian armed forces have evolved really on this front. Fifth, we are more and more looking to what we have achieved in terms of capabilities and experience as a valuable asset to be offered to partners and to whomever requires this in the world. We think that our experience on counter-narcotics, counter-insurgency, and counter-terrorism cannot be replicated automatically anywhere, as we cannot replicate any other country's experience. But what we think is that that experience can be shared because it's there. Our Colombian armed forces suddenly became, after years of efforts and years of very tough environment, with a set of knowledge that can be shared internationally. As part of that sharing, we want as well to keep enhancing our professional standards, enhancing the capabilities and the qualities that are required in a modern democracy for our armed forces. And in consequence, we have been as well supporting, in essence, the regional partners, Central America and the Caribbean. There's almost none of these countries that doesn't have any police mission or military mission supporting them from Colombia. And we think we have to do that not only because it's what we should as friend of those countries, but at the same time to help them avoid the influence of transnational crime and drug trafficking almost running their public life and their activities. So we're supporting as much as we can some of those nations. But we're ready to do it anywhere. When I explain this, it fits very well our decision to look for more cooperation, both with multilateral organizations and with bilateral partners. And we will keep doing this. This at the same time gives some future to the armed forces. We're going to get into post-conflict. We're going to have peace in Colombia. That peace is going to happen on one hand because what President Santos has offered, in a sense that he wants the terrorists to understand that they will never get anything with the use of weapons, explosives, or violence. If they don't take this opportunity, what is clear is that we will continue to move ahead and to progress as we have been doing in the past few years, always having an innovation and transformation process, always having to adapt and to be flexible to the new challenges, but always keep advancing and moving forward as we have done. So if it's true, we're going to get in post-conflict sooner or later, in my opinion, no farther than 4 or 5 years, even if these efforts do not move ahead, and they should move ahead. I think that we need our armed forces to continue their modernization and transformation process. We are doing a planning a scenario effort, and on that regard, we see our services working on development in the country, working on protection of our natural resources and infrastructure, protecting our borders, but at the same time contributing to peace and stability in the international arena. As much as we get connected in our development plan, having so many free trade agreements and so many visions around the globe, I think we need to be more and more engaged with these capabilities that our armed forces have been developing in an effort with other partners. That's how we see it. Now, all this strategy has allowed us to put together some practical plans. On one hand, we have a plan against terrorism that was renewed a year and a half ago. We call it the Plan Sword of Honor. That plan, I would summarize it by saying it is a campaign that it implies a joint, combined, and interagency effort that implies that we are launching, or we have launched an offensive, a simultaneous offensive into 10 areas of the country for the first time at the same time, simultaneous, as I said, and it has implied serious pressure to the FARC and ELN. The consequence in summary is the following. The FARC has lost in the past, during this administration, just for you to know, 43 members of their leadership. The number one, their maximum leader, and the number two, their maximum military leader, if it can be called like that, and 41 other leaders of fronts or mobile columns, which are the structures they use for their fighting. It's quite substantial. I have to tell, it's not a matter of praising our effort, but it's a matter of measuring our effort. And I can tell, never that I can look back, the terrorist group of the FARC has been affected like this. Demobilization is speaking again. Yesterday's report implied 14 demobilized in 4 departments of Colombia. Last year we had 1,000 demobilized. This year we're having some like 5 to 10% more demobilized than last year. 30% of the demobilized are coming with 10 or more years in the organization. So every time one of these guys demobilize, what they're losing is not just an individual, they're losing a whole set of experience in terrorism and violence. Capture of networks is increasing. We have merged in certain areas of the country, as part of this campaign, judicial police units with military units. And this combination is resulting very effective to fight the clandestine networks and cells of the FARC and ELN. We will continue and we will have to pursue on that in order to be effective. We have made an interesting effort, and it should get increased in the months to come with the National Attorney Office in order to have a better judicialization of terrorist networks. So that has happened in the FARC-ELN front. ELN story is quite similar, and the results and the pressure that President Santos has requested to the armed forces in the middle of this peace negotiation is happening. And only thing that I would mention on this front is that I wish we could do more. This is what I tell our commanders in the field, our services every day. We need to do more. Victory is at our side, but we need to push now more than ever, in order to, moving ahead as President Santos has planned. And I always tell, let's assume we continue to make the pressure. Well, this is what will guarantee that the government can negotiate a feasible agreement. A feasible agreement for President Santos implies that red lines cannot be touched by terrorists, that the country will not just change because they won, but that we want to include them in the society. That's the difference. If this doesn't work, and the terrorists continue to be stubborn, to not understand what Colombian people want, well, hitting them as hard as we can will continue to put them more and more on how they look nowadays. They're not so different anymore from criminal organizations, from crime bands and structures. So we need to keep pushing them toward that end. Green Heart Plan is a police-driven plan that in essence has been put together to fight organized crime and all the other, I would say, crimes that are affecting the most regular life of Colombians. On the organized crime effort, we're really producing a major effect. Every criminal band, the large criminal bands that had some kind of national-wide presence, have been affected at their leadership. Every leader of those bands has been captured or killed in action in the past 15 months. The results there are substantial, and the degradation of those structures is quite happening. By the way, the support of, well, they don't like to be mentioned, but I have to tell, the support of UK on this effort is quite substantial and quite valuable. And I think as much as we continue to move on that perspective, I would say that a year from now, criminal bands will be something different from what we know about them today. They will be smaller, they will be, there's some kind of atomization of what they are, and we're confronting now some kind of different problem. You can think about this like in the following way. By the end of the 80s, we have the largest ever cartels, the Medellin and Cali cartels. Those were defeated. After them, we had the regional cartels here. So we had the cartel of La Costa, the cartel of Los Llanos, a set of cartels. Those were in essence defeated, Norte del Valle and so on. After those cartels, the cartels that were around merged into the what was known as AUC, the paramilitary. They merged among them. When those organizations, when that organization demobilized by 2004, 2006, some of those came back into what is known as criminal bands. Criminal bands are organizations of nationwide influence. Those criminal bands were 27 by the year 2007. By the end of last year, they were in essence 4 or 5, and only one was really having nationwide capability. If we continue at the path we're working, as I said before, maybe next year we will talk about a different problem than criminal bands. So this is important, this is ineffective. And the other part of Greenheart plan is what I would call criminality, street crime on different levels and different layers. And let me insist on this. I mentioned it before. Some years ago, people was, when they talk about security in Colombia, they were talking about terrorism, they were talking about major organized crime. More and more people is concerned about what happens to their life. And let me put it this way, this is not so comfortable for a minister of defense. Believe me, there's no other minister of defense maybe in the world that also has that portfolio. In Colombia we do. And we will do it for a while because we need that everything is coordinated, or in a different perspective, because part of the street crime might be the consequence of the effectiveness on the major threats. So as much as we are reducing drug trafficking today is 30% of what it was 10 years ago. But they are moving from being cartels to being gangs. They are moving from big exports of drugs to the US and others, still they do, to, we call it micro traffickers, you know, local consumption. So we need to keep coordinating and fighting all these chain of criminality. I think we are having progress on that front too. This plan was put together less than a year ago, and there are already some interesting results that I think we need to pursue. Sometimes having progress, as I said, in these kind of policies is quite difficult and quite challenging and sometimes frustrating, and sometimes the public opinion will go against you and will want results tomorrow morning. Well, as we were discussing with the ambassador, this is a good thing not to be a full-time politician. So what I do say is, who cares? What I have to do is what we have to do. And sometimes doing the right thing takes time. And that will be maybe my final message here. That will be maybe the real history I want to leave for you today about Colombia. It's a matter of pursuing, it's a matter of keeping the effort, and it's a matter of always adapting, being flexible, and looking to the future rather than to the past. The past should help us to inspire ourselves, to honor our heroes, to honor our soldiers, our policemen, our civil servants that have died or get wounded because of their service, but is keep moving ahead and is producing results. I think we have changed reality in Colombia. We have now a different reality, but we cannot just stay here. We need to follow a little bit, in this case, what President Santos' vision has presented, and follow to the next level and see what comes next. But in order to do that, we need to keep doing well what we have learned to do well. Fighting crime, fighting terrorists, and use all this as the base of the progress of our society. Nigel, thank you very much.
Minister, thank you very much indeed. You've given us an account of impressive delivery, and you've sketched out a very broad and ambitious agenda to take forward into the future. So you've given us plenty to think about, and in the process you've given institutes such as my own great reassurance that we will have plenty to occupy us for some time to come. So thank you very much for that. We have about 25 minutes for questions. Could I please ask that when you do get recognized, you tell us who you are, and please wait for the microphone to reach you before putting your point. And also in the interests of giving people plenty of opportunity to raise questions, could you please ensure as far as possible that yours are brief and end with a question mark? Right, okay. Gentleman in the front row, second row, sorry. Yep. So.
Thank you. Minister, sorry, my name's Henry Robinson. I write analysis on the peace process, particularly in Colombia, based on my own experience in Northern Ireland. I'd like to say I share your enthusiasm and belief that peace will come to Colombia, and this conflict, like all conflicts, do come to an end. My question was, I believe that there are not exact similarities in peace processes, but there are some similarities that I've seen between the Colombian peace process and the peace process in Northern Ireland. The main one is that the main guerrilla group in Northern Ireland, the IRA, realised eventually that the best way forward was politics and rejected the Armalite. My question would be for you, have you given any consideration to the 8,000 to 10,000 FARC guerrillas, ELN, the number varies depending who you're talking to, about what possible role they may have in assimilation after peace within the armed forces of Colombia, particularly their knowledge around mines, heavily populated mines in Colombia, and their knowledge against cartels, obviously after they sign up to the peace process.
You want me to answer one by one? All right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. It's on.
It's on?
Yeah.
All right. Several things. First, remember this is not the first time we have a peace process in Colombia. We have had already 5 processes that have implied demobilization of terrorist or paramilitary groups. It happened already in Colombia. I think that's an important feature. Second, this is not the first time we negotiate with the FARC. This is the 4th time we are trying to get into a major formal negotiation. I think that I mentioned because sometimes people think that this is the first time, the only time, but what we're trying to do this time is that this is the final time, and the real final solution, at least for the problem we have as we know it. Second, President Santos has defined several red lines, and he has been very clear on those. One of those is that he will not negotiate, as did happen in other cases, at least in Central America and South Africa, the structure, organization, or the way the armed forces are organized, are defined. I think this is very important. In other places, the main discussion was how to have the post-conflict armed forces and how much to merge or embed part of those members of those groups into the armed forces. It won't happen in Colombia. That's what President Santos has defined. We are not thinking on having members of the FARC or ELN either in the military or the police. And let me remind that anyway, they are permanently committing crimes that not necessarily can be understood or accepted as political crimes. They attack civilians. Well, it's part of the conflict. Someone might say, still I am not so comfortable on accepting that concept. But at the same time, they are in drug trafficking, in extortion, in criminal mining, and so on. So this gives all set of reasons to understand and think that they cannot be part of armed forces. By the way, it would be preferable to have them without access to weapons. It wouldn't be so comfortable for Colombian people to think that we brought them to peace and that then we will keep them with access to weapons because of the consequence of their actions. Now, what we have discussed, and I think I want to be very cautious on this because I think this is a process that part of the reason that is moving is because it's the president himself that is controlling this, and certainly not even me have been involved or, moving ideas different than those that the president has signaled. But what I can tell is that we have studied alternatives for including these members of the FARC in activities such as eradication, such as civil works, and others. What we'll have to find is which is the best way, if it is through an agency or different ways. But I will prefer not to get deeper on this because I think this is part of the negotiation and it is part of what can come out of the discussion.
Thank you very much. Frank Gardner right at the front here. Yeah, I've got, yeah. We may need to group the questions.
Don't worry.
Yeah.
Minister, thanks very much. Frank Gardner, BBC security correspondent. As a newsman, you'll forgive me for looking for the headline here. How exactly would you characterize where you've got to with the FARC? Have you defeated Latin America's longest running insurgency? Are you on the verge of it? Are you confident you will defeat it? I just want to get this absolutely accurate. I mean, are you in the process of defeating it? How are you going to characterize this? Help me out here. Help my editors out.
Write your article for you.
I am not so good for headlines, but I always try to explain what is behind our thoughts. First, what is defeating an insurgency? Defeating an insurgency is killing them all, is putting them in line and make them surrender, or is basically denying their objectives, putting them to find different ways than fighting to achieve their objectives. Depending on which of these three, we are more close to defeat them or not. But what I can tell you is that they have been weakening, that they are 45% of what they were in arms, in weapons, or in personnel. I can tell you that some years ago, they had active presence in 50% of municipalities in Colombia. We have 1,103 municipalities. In around 50% of municipalities, they were active, making presence, making terrorist activities or subversive activities. According to data of last year, only 11% of municipalities had presence. And they are in areas where population is very low and in which their influence is quite low. Their sources of funding have been reduced substantially, and they have been losing all their top leadership in a faster pace than they did 5 years ago, year by year. So, it wouldn't be proper for a Minister of Defense to be just quoted as saying, we defeat the FARC and still we're fighting. I will not say that. But believe me, we are defeating them. They are being weakened, and we will continue to weaken them to the point in which they might not continue to fight and find different alternatives.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sorry for the headline.
Okay, I think in the interest of time, we'll take 2 or 3 questions at a time. There are 2 ladies there, a lady in lavender top and then one diagonally in front of her in pink. That one, yeah, thank you.
Okay, Louise Winstanley from AB Colombia. Thank you very much for your presentation. It was very interesting. I would like to focus on one aspect that I think maybe you didn't touch on that I think is very important, and that is the protection of human rights and how we build democracy. As you know, Colombia's continually had a problem with human rights and the levels of impunity. And so that's why I was particularly interested in your discussion around the jurisdiction, the military jurisdiction. And as you know, there's been a lot of concerns really about Colombia taking a backward step. And I was interested in what you had to say about the crimes that would be excluded from that. But maybe if I could give an example of one of the things that have been particularly worrying for us in thinking about how you strengthen democracy and human rights.
Could there be a question mark?
Yes, yes,
soon,
it
please?
is. Yeah. And that is because the numbers of extrajudicial killings that were termed as false positives that the special rapporteur said was a systematic practice through the armed forces. I'm just wondering how those would actually be brought into the military justice system, or passed, sorry, from the military justice system to the ordinary justice system, because those would have been characterized at the time, because there were people who were killed and then dressed in the FARC uniforms and passed off as positive killings in combat. It would have been considered a war crime and part of the duty of the officers. So I don't see how those types of crimes would have been passed or will be passed from the military jurisdiction to the ordinary jurisdiction. So this is one of the issues. And the other question that I have is how, in thinking about the changes over to a more democratic system, a different way of policing and army, etc., what kind of thinking has been given to this, particularly in dealing with things like social protests? Because I think you'll be aware at the moment in Catatumbo there's been a social protest by rural peasant farmers that were actually allegedly shot at by the army. So I'm just wondering how you're going to tackle those sorts of problems of moving from one type of conflict and maybe dealing with things like social conflict as well.
Okay, thank you. We'll take the lady diagonally in front. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Domitila Sagramoso. I'm from the Department of War Studies at King's College London. It was a pity you couldn't come to our talk. I just wanted to ask you, it was really fascinating how you explained the new sort of strategies that are being put in place to combat more effectively the FARC and the ELN. On the other hand, you said, and we agree that Colombia has a lot to share in its experiences, and it's an interesting case where there is a sort of a defeat or close to a defeat of an insurgency. And in Europe and in the US, there's so much concern about, for example, what to do about the Taliban insurgency. So I wondered if you could share with us, to the extent of possible, what have been the main sort of drives at the operational and strategic level which have allowed you to be successful? I don't know how specific you can be, but I think some of us are really interested in finding out how was it that the military have been so successful, as you said, sort of in catching leaders, in recuperating areas. To what extent can you share with us sort of some of the main strategies adopted? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Perhaps we can take those two in.
Thank you, Nigel. On the first question, well, first of all, the only reason why in Colombia we have armed forces is to protect human rights. And the only reason why we decide to strengthen all these years the armed forces is to protect the human rights of Colombians. That is how we have reduced homicides. That is how we have reduced kidnapping. That is how we have reduced every violation on human rights onto the society as a whole or onto specific groups in particular. The only reason why Colombians have been protected more and more is because we have been able now to make presence on every municipality of the country with police and with the military, and we have used them depending on what is the necessity and what is the kind of threat that we confront. So I think that's the first point I want you to stress. The real protectors of human rights in Colombia are the soldiers and the police. Now, do we have had or could we have misbehavior among our armed forces? In the past, apparently we did, not apparently, it happened. And we had to make decisions, and we have to try those who have been on dishonor behavior. Could it happen in the future? Maybe. We hope that it happens less, as much as we continue to educate and to raise the standards. And by the way, to have a military justice that can discipline with a very draconian style whomever misbehaves. That's the best way to guarantee to have a strong but well-behaved military and police institution. Now, on the case you presented, I think there's a lot of misinformation, and I'm sad about it, and sometimes I don't know the reason. Sometimes I believe it's a political agenda. Sometimes I believe it's just people is not well aware, and they just listen part of what is being told. But let me explain. Has never been true that those cases of extrajudicial killings will come to the military justice. By the way, those have been denied by constitution, like in any other country in the world that I know, that cannot come from ordinary justice to the military jurisdiction. And I think this is very important. This is why I think there has been some kind of misinformation or misunderstanding, but I want to insist on that statement very clear. Actually, I had the opportunity to explain it to the European Parliament some days ago, and I think that it's important for us to come and answer this question very clearly as I'm trying to do so. Now, the cases of quote-unquote false positives, that is not a legal word, but is a media political word that has been used for those cases that you described that now are defined as extrajudicial killings, cases in which potentially members of the armed forces killed a civilian and then presented as member of a terrorist organization, have never, or at least have not been in military justice in the past 5 years. All these cases have been in the ordinary justice. And by the way, if there's a thing I would like to have is a solution on those cases. I wish them soon in the ordinary justice, as we should, to define who is responsible and should be penalized for it, and who is not, and who is innocent and has been mischarged, if I can say it. That's very important. On the case of Catatumbo that you mentioned, Catatumbo is one of those areas that were under control of the FARC. It is a buffer area for the FARC in the border, and as part of our campaign, keep it clear, we decide to make an offensive there and put boots on ground and put more soldiers and more police to be with the people and to protect the people. Unfortunately, what the FARC has been using in their area is for coca cultivation and to protect some of the leaders of the terrorists that live in Venezuela. I have to be careful on this, but I want you to know that. So part of what we're doing is eradication of coca, as we have done in other parts of the country with quite success. And part of the programs we're offering is alternative funds and resources for these coca cultivations. Of course, peasants have been at the mercy of terrorists there for a long time, let's face it. And they can be sometimes even not only infiltrated, but in more practical terms, threatened to participate in certain kind of activities. What they have been requesting is the FARC agenda. One, to stop the coca eradication, which we cannot accept. And second, to declare their area as a zone without the presence of the armed forces, which, who do you think is asking for this? You know, FARC or FARC-connected people? So of course, the government cannot accept that. It's against the Constitution, you know. So in consequence, what President Santos has instructed is one of his personal advisors to go to the region with the other ministries, the Ministry of Agriculture, the Ministry of Transportation, the National Planning Department, to offer alternatives to the people. Because yes, we do understand that people is being threatened, that people is being pressured, and that we need to offer them really practical solutions, because the state has not been in those areas for a long time. And believe me, if there's a ministry these days in Colombia that is always pushing the rest of the government to make presence, to give social responses, to give other alternatives to the people, is the armed forces, the Ministry of Defense. So this is the case right now in Catatumbo. Certainly we do care for people. Certainly social protest in Colombia is absolutely permitted and has to be protected by the armed forces. By the way, that social protest began a week and a half ago, and it happened slowly, so we in essence didn't really put any force. Suddenly, infiltrated agents of the FARC promote a riot and put on fire the mayor office and the attorney general office in a town called Tibú. So we decide to control public order. And that's what we are trying to do right now. But the solution, as I said, is not a military or police solution. It's offering options and alternatives to the people. That is what President Santos has instructed. Now, on your second question, there are many analyses that can be done about what has been part of our progress and what are the main engines of that progress. I'm sure Nigel will write a paper sooner or later on that part too. But I would say that moving from the strategic part to a more operational part, certainly in the strategic side, leadership, resources, all that has been important. International cooperation has been critical. But in a more operational matter, I think that first, being flexible with the military organization in order to put together units that are not necessarily regular in the organization, but to allow them to make territorial control or protection of infrastructure or counter-guerrilla operations, depending on what is required where. I think that has been an interesting feature. And it has happened in the Army, in the Navy, in the Air Force, and in the police. We have been able to create special units for different matters in a very flexible way. Second, provide some kind of assets that always are insufficient. I would say that still we would require a lot more assets, but we have focused very much our procurement agenda not to buy anything that is not needed, but only to buy things that could be useful in our current struggle. Third, and maybe more important, enhancing intelligence. And enhancing intelligence is not just buying toys for them, but it's putting them at the strategic level in order to plan, in order to understand, and in order to launch, I would say, effective operations. And that's what we have done, and that's what the public opinion has seen the most. Is not only weakening the terrorists and criminal organizations by making more presence and denying them space and access to the people, but definitely is attacking them with effectiveness and with the least cost for the population. And fourth, a little bit of what I was discussing before. These kind of problems are not military problems, are not police problems, are broader problems, and require and imply that understanding and an increasing will of other agencies of the state, of the government as a whole, to be there. And let me tell you, if I were to look this situation 5 years from now, if the FARC does not understand that they have to leave what they do right now, what will harm them the most is that the state provides to the people what the state is supposed to provide. And I think that is going to happen more and more, and that is going to be even more harmful for their intentions. Nigel, thank you very much.
Minister, thank you very much. I'm afraid we've run out of time. My apologies to those whose questions we weren't able to take. Minister, you've been very generous with your time and your information. I'd like to thank you. I'd also like to present you with this copy of the military balance. It sounds as if we already need to update it, and I'm sure we can look to you to tell us what we've got wrong. Can I please ask you to join me in thanking the Minister, but before you do that, could I please ask you also to remain in your seats until the Minister and his party have left. So, Minister, thank you very much indeed.